reached here. And then once it's mostly roasted, it's going to come off the spit again, cut up, and then fried lightly. So this is still running a little bit pink, done to a turn, as they say, meaning to within one turn of the spit, which is exactly what I want, ready for this last quick flash fry. Although we call it frying, it's more like sort of braising. I shan't give it long. About 2 minutes, and it'll be done. And that with the beans and a sprinkle of dandelion leaves should make him one of the most fearsome warriors in Christendom.
It's nearly time to down tools at the end of the day. But first, there's a special delivery to the top of the tower.
Oh, you can really smell your food. What have you got for us?
Smoke.
Oh, wow.
Well.
Right on cue. Oh, pass.
All right. Crockery.
Crockery.
Fried onions.
Fried onions. Tomo's food.
Beans.
My food.
Oh, pork.
A nicely balanced diet, then.
Oh, yeah. So, you know, where do you fancy yourself on the social scale, really?
I know where I am on the social scale. I'm roughing it at the moment.
Oh, and by the way, dandelion petals, they are associated with the planet Mars. So you're going to be that martial by the time you're finished. That's the point.
I see.
Yeah? So we're going to start with...
I'll start with a bit of pottage.
Some man-at-arms.
Yeah. I know you're a man.
Enough of that.
Start in a bit of work.
Okay.
I'll eat this and I'll start working. I'm gonna next bit of that thrice cooked pork.
It would all look more lovely, wouldn't it, if it was on silver platters and there were beautiful napkins and so forth, but never mind.
It's got that rustic look to it.
Yeah, I'm good at rustic. I don't really do posh, pretty food.
But if you're up on the walls doing guard duty, I reckon you actually want the kind of pottage, almost stew type meal. You can just, you know, you don't have to think about it. You can just enjoy your food.
Yeah,
it's going to warm you up.
Of course, I suppose, you know, if you're in a castle, this is a great meal on day one of the siege. But by day 4, you're starting to look at the stocks and say, how much have we got? And as it drags on.
As much as anything, food is a weapon of war.
Exactly.
Castles dominated the medieval landscape, and Britain has some of the finest in the world. Today, most are decaying relics, many of their secrets buried in time. Now, historian Ruth Goodman and archaeologists Tom Pinfold and Peter Ginn are turning the clock back to relearn the secrets of the medieval castle builders.
This is the ultimate in medieval technology.
The origin of our castles is distinctly French, introduced to Britain at the time of the Norman conquest of 1066.
3, 2, 1, tirez!
Here in the Burgundy region of France is Guédelon Castle, the world's biggest archaeological experiment. A 25-year project to build a castle from scratch, using the same tools, techniques, and materials available in the 13th century.
It's a lot of hard work at the coalface, because this is industry.
For the next 6 months, Ruth, Peter, and Tom will experience the daily rigors of medieval construction.
Drop down. Yep.
And everyday life.
Looking really good, you know.
How workers dressed and ate.
You can really smell your food.
And the art of combat. This is the story of how to build a medieval castle. It's May, and the team have been immersed in the building works alongside Guédelon's masons.
Perfect. Oh,
They've learned how the castle was defended in times of war.
Every stone has to be in line because this is going to go up and up and up.
Now the team discover the surprisingly colourful world of 13th century castle interiors. And much of the material they work with will come straight from the ground.
Some of the stuff in here is ochre.
From paint to brighten the rooms,
It's hot. Look at the difference on my fingers.
to turning mud into floor tiles.
Can you imagine living in a world with no electric lights?
And they'll be rediscovering an ancient art in a midnight firing of the kiln. The medieval castles we're used to seeing today are scarred by centuries of warfare and weather erosion. Most of their original roofs, carpentry, and interior finishes have long since disappeared. But these drab walls are a far cry from how they looked in their heyday.
This is how many of us think of the interior of castles. Bare stone, echoey, damp, gritty underfoot, but that's because we're used to ruins. When they were in use back in the 13th century, they were rather different. You have to imagine tiled floors and plaster on the walls, perhaps painted, whitewashed, and then hangings of fabric over the top, filled with furniture. And that too is covered in fabrics, cushions, all sorts. An entirely different beast.
To strive for accuracy, the Guédelon project has adopted a specific historical time frame to work to. The castle is being designed and built as it would have been in the France of the 1230s and 40s, during the reign of King Louis IX. The region of Puisaye in Burgundy was governed by one Jean de Toucy, a vassal to the king. In turn, de Toucy was the overlord of several other lower-ranking noblemen. And it was one of these lesser nobles who would have commissioned a castle like the one being built here at Guédelon today. It's not a grand royal castle, bristling with military might and enormous wealth, but a fortified residence of relatively modest taste and design, according to the rank and means of the imaginary lord of Guédelon. The team, along with site administrator Sarah Preston, are exploring some of the key rooms and quarters within the castle to find out how the interiors are being dressed.
This is the castle's great hall. Great is the word.
So this is very much the hub of castle life. It's a dining hall, it's a banqueting, feasting hall.
I mean, this room is a statement of power and prestige, isn't it?
Absolutely, which is why it's important to bear in mind, of course, once it's finished, we won't have these bare stone walls.
The Great Hall was the political and business hub of castle life. This was where the lord held court, receiving his tenants and listening to their concerns and grievances. With many of the social rituals of the day being held here, it was important for the interior design to show off his wealth and status to invited guests. Over the next few years, the Great Hall at Guédelon and the Great Tower adjacent to it will be dressed in the style of a 13th century lord and his lady.
If I have to spend
So this is currently the Lord's chamber. This is where the Lord would sleep with his wife and his children. It's certainly a residential chamber. You can see that from the fireplace on the wall behind us. So it can be heated. That's not true of all the rooms in the castle.
The stone walls are rough, uneven and drafty. But they would have been dressed and painted. Peter and Tom are going to be painting and tiling some of the castle's indoor spaces, while Ruth makes paint.
So this is the storeroom.
But first, Sarah takes her to the already decorated kitchen under the Great Hall.
But eventually it will have a render applied and then a lime wash to make it much whiter and brighter. Come and have a look.
Oh, I see what you mean. I mean, that's real darkness into light, isn't it?
It makes such a difference. People aren't used to necessarily seeing the inside of castle walls rendered and lime washed, but it's made such a difference to the people who actually work in the kitchen because it's like...
It seems sort of bounce off,
turning
doesn't
on
it?
an electric light, absolutely. And I guess in terms of hygiene, it would have made a difference
Oh,
as
yeah,
well.
definitely, really. It sort of kills anything that might be there and stops bugs getting into all the cracks and things. So you start with a really sterile surface, repaint it if you don't, whenever you need to.
I mean, obviously, so far we haven't had the time to render the inside of all the rooms. We've got other priorities at the moment, but as soon as we finished kind of the major building work, then we can get on with the job of rendering the inside, but I hope also the outside of the castle, because often the outsides of castles were also rendered and lime washed, because in terms of visibility, it just meant that your castle stood out in the landscape. So that's something that we couldn't necessarily get away with in a genuine historic monument, but here on this experimental site, that's something that we can show our visitors. The Tower of London, the White Tower, was named because it was lime washed on the outside.
The tower nearest the quarry, known as the Quarry Tower, would have been a guard room or shooting gallery. Even this would have been brightly decorated. The boys have been tasked by stonemason Fabrice Mangot with rendering the interior wall with lime mortar, the medieval equivalent of plaster.
We're going to use 2.5 buckets of sand and 1 lime and water and mix it in. What we're looking for here is the right consistency. Keep on adding a little moisture, turn it in, turn it in.
A bit more. It's okay.
Are you happy? Is that good enough?
It's good.
Yeah. Cozy workspace.
Fabrice demonstrates how a medieval wall is rendered.
Put some water.
We're not drenching it though, are we? Just dampening the stone.
If you don't put water, mortar,
It just won't stick. Right.
okay?
Archaeological research has revealed that rendering wouldn't have been applied in several smooth layers, but with a single rough coat, using a technique similar to spreading butter.
Interesting technique, isn't it? Keeping the board close to the wall, pushing the render up.
You understand?
Shall we go first?
You want
Yeah,
to
give it a go.
Let me get it wrong.
Yeah, I'm going to learn from your mistakes, my friend.
So to do a turret like this, how long do you think it would take?
2-3 days
2-3 days.
That's 10 days for you,
for
Tom.
true mason.
At least 10 days for me.
Good luck.
We'll need it.
See you later.
As the lime mortar is relatively porous, it will draw out any dampness in the wall, and so help to preserve the masonry underneath.
It's interesting, isn't it, that we're only putting on 1 coat, that butter coat.
But this is an established practice, isn't it? You always think when you go to the ruined castles in the UK or around Europe, these bare walls are what they were looking at. However, not the case. It was a prestige thing to get a layer render up, decorate it.
Yeah, I mean, castles, majority of castles, they are just ruins, aren't they? You're coming to them very long after their lives.
The medieval manufacture of tiles for castle roofs and floor spaces was an industry in itself. So far, at Guédelon, 28,000 tiles have been created for the roof of the Great Hall building alone, a job which took 4 years to achieve. It's estimated that a total of 80,000 tiles will be needed to cover the roofs of the castle in its entirety. But as the 4 towers around the curtain wall are still under construction, tile production has now shifted from roof tiles to floor tiles. And Tom is about to discover just how laborious the process is to make just one tile.
Summer's coming soon, and soon.
Breaking up some of this clay. We're going to use it for our tiles. Obviously not in this state. We actually need to get a lot of these impurities out. But some of the stuff in here is ochre. And ochre can actually be turned into paint. So I'm going to separate some of that out. But now, just stack up on this clay, get it back to the Tuileries or the tile makers.
In the 11th century, many hamlets and villages in France specialized in tile production to meet increasing demand from the local nobility. And as the medieval tile trade grew, so did the strict regulations it was governed by, designed to standardize production.
Oh, that's the thing about clay, isn't it? It's not easy to work. You feel all the muscles getting involved.
In 1280, a decree from Toulouse stipulated that good tiles may only be made from well-pugged clay, well trampled underfoot, and not over-dry.
It feels nice, though. Is this good for the hands, good for the skin?
Very nice for the skin, yeah. Some people are paying for this.
Lucky us. I've always wanted soft hands.
Tom and tilemaker Émeric Guyot are now removing any twigs and stones and making the clay homogeneous and malleable.
Ah, so this hard lump here, this could be ochre.
Yes.
The ochre pigments contain colorful iron oxides and are set aside to be used for making paint. An integral feature of castle design were the toilets. They were known as garde-robe, the French word for wardrobe. Clothes would often be kept inside them, because it was believed the smell of ammonia from urine kept parasites at bay. Garde-robes were often built out of the castle walls to allow the waste to drop down through the hole to the ground or moat below. Guédelon keeps a wooden grill over the holes to dissuade any modern-day visitors from attempting to spend a penny.
It's a big question, isn't it, how people use garde-robes? There is little bits of evidence in the earliest of the manners books which are aimed at pages who are serving a knight and they're hoping to become a squire, become a knight. So it's for little lads, you know. Their first job of the day, before their lord is up, is to prepare the privy. And he's told to make it extremely clean. He's got to sweep it out and make it clean. He's also got to put cloths in there. Not quite sure how the cloths were used, but they're to go in there. And sweet-smelling herbs, so that it's somewhere comfortable and pleasant to be. So at least for those at the very top of society, going to the toilet ought to have been
Quite a nice experience. Yeah, I think, I mean, it wouldn't have smelled too bad. I mean, I know the poo's going down, and yes, if it's not getting moved, there might be a bit of wafting up. But those herbs would certainly have taken the edge off.
And there is, of course, the question of toilet paper.
There is. I mean, many people think leaves and moss, but let's face it, deforestation.
Where the heck are you going to get a leaf of the right size in the middle of January? I mean, honestly. And then also you think, well, moss, but you'd have to have moss plantations, wouldn't you, to keep a big community going?
It gets very, very dry in summer.
So, I mean, there's nothing to say that people didn't use. I mean, you know as well as I do that archaeologically all sorts of things turn up in cesspits. So probably people used whatever was to hand. But I do wonder if maybe the more normal system, especially in a castle, would have been to have your own cloth or rag or flannel to wash yourself with.
Or even a communal rag.
quite possibly.
Washed out in a bucket.
Washed out in a bucket.
And this-
It's perfectly possible.
For these privies, well, it's certainly use a coat of render, coat of lime wash, probably a loose seats.
I think a door might be a good idea too.
And a door.
So you have to take some, this finger's grease is dripping. You have to take it on your finger like this, and that's for cake. You put it inside.
Just work that around. And that's to actually lubricate the side of the template, is it?
Yes.
So the tile will come out easily at the end.
So I like to start with hand because you can feel all the corners. It's very important to have good corners in a tile. If not, the masons are really not satisfied to work. It's very hard for them.
We don't want to upset the masons.
No, don't do that. So you can use this as well.
Right,
When you think the corners are okay, you can just finish with...
Right, so... But you're not just hitting it, are you? Sort of looks like you're rolling a bit there.
Yeah, a little bit. If you like do it like this,
Right, okay.
you see.
So
Okay.
it's almost like
It's
you're
nuts.
twisting it off as you make contact. That's what's happening with you. With me, it's kind of in between, I think.
new tool.
New tool.
You use this one like this and try to get something very flat. So we have to see if it's okay on the other side. When there's a problem, it's always with the corners. Always something with the corners. So we have to check the corners. Okay, my corners are good.
What do you think?
This is perfect.
Oh, yeah?
Very good. Yes, yes. Masons will be happy. Okay, you put it there and you do like this. With the grease poke,
I wonder who's flown
Normally
away today. Hasn't stopped since
it's
the
green.
morning.
But you have to sign with the name of this place.
And basically, that's like quality control.
Yes,
And if we've done one, so we've got another 69 to do.
yes. Go back to work.
Just beyond the castle walls, Ruth is visiting Guédelon's paint house to discover how the ochre found in the quarry and in the clay is used to make pigments for paint.
I'm going to start by grinding down the earths.
Valérie Heurtaud is a ceramicist by trade from a family of local potters. She's in charge of pigments, paint making, and decoration at Guédelon.
Oh, so these are the pieces that Tom was finding in amongst the clay when he was doing the tiling.
Donc on ne sait pas la couleur de la pierre, la couleur qu'il y a dans la pierre, on ne la connaît pas.
Paint's funny stuff. It's not the same as dye. Dye stains the fibres of what you're dyeing. So if you get a wood stain, that is a dye for wood. Because it's dyeing the wood fibres in the same way as cloth is a dye that stains the fibres. Paint is different. Paint is bits of coloured stuff that are glued onto a surface. And so if they're very big lumps, the amount of light coming off is quite small, the colour looks patchy and thin. If you can make the particles very, very tiny, the light will refract off them in a great burst and you'll get a really strong, intense colour. I mean, I shouldn't think a 13th century person thought about light refraction, but they did know that if you grind it thoroughly, you get a much better paint. It's not a bad colour, is it? Look good against the yellow. I've got the yellow still on there.
Yellow ochre is the other key colour found in the natural Guédelon environment.
Donc on mélange.
This really is the colour of Guédelon.
Oui.
Look at that. When you're around here, everything's this colour, absolutely everything. That is the dust that we breathe in whenever you go anywhere near the castle. It's what grinds underfoot. It's the, you know, just look at the place. This is the colour of the ground. So having sort of crushed it up a bit and dissolved it,
We're now sieving it. We want small particles.
As the mixture settles, the heavier ochre particles fall to the bottom, and the remaining liquid is left out in the sun to dry. The finer particles left behind are then ground down into a powder.
Enormous amount of work to grind this down to the fineness that you need, but when you just see the range of colours that are being produced just out of the earth of Geddelon, you can see why people would bother. Just look at it.
Out in the castle courtyard, Peter and Philippe Delage, known to his fellow craftspeople as Gandalf, are mixing lime wash, made with 1 part lime and 1 part water.
What is that in French, lime wash?
Lait de chaux.
Lait de chaux? Oh, milk of lime. How can you tell it's good consistency? There's more on the...
Oh, it's really good.
That's good? Yeah, that's good.
Oh, it should be enough. Yeah.
I'll grab that bucket.
Yes.
Come on. Up the tower.
Peter heads towards the Lord and Lady's bedchamber in the Great Tower to brighten things up in the garden.
Right, left, English, French, à gauche, gauche. And then it's down, down, down. And it just gives a beautiful, beautiful texture.
Bring this in, move that there.
I know at Geddelon there was a massive debate as to whether, you know, they should leave the stones, the walls bare, because all this work had gone in by the masons to put the stone there. And they say if you cover it up with mortar, with render, and paint it with lime wash, the public won't see it. But this is how the castles were in the medieval age. Of course, as we come across castles, they're ruins generally. Very little plasterwork survives.
Ruth and Valerie experiment with a bit of 13th century chemistry.
Bring this in, move that there.
So this is the local yellow ochre earth.
Oui, oui.
And we're cooking it,
Parce qu'il va devenir rouge.
so we're trying to turn it red.
Oui.
It's quite exciting, isn't it, that this just comes out of the ground all yellow. And you can get this range of colours.
Là, il est déjà en train de changer de couleur.
Oh,
Sur
yes.
le bord.
Yes, you're right. I can see. There, where it's hot. Look at the difference on my fingers.
Fields need a bit of a drink. So could I.
Yellow ochre is a hydrated iron oxide, known as limonite. As it's heated over the fire, some of the limonite turns into hematite, turning the ochre into rich, darker shades, such as burnt sienna and burnt umber.
Fresh start.
Pigments like this are really ancient. Right across Europe, if you think of those cave paintings right at the dawn of human history, this is the sort of paint that they were using to make them. And if you think of Britain, the Picts, those people are known or described in the ancient Roman texts as being covered in red paint. The red men, and the Irish talk about it too. It seems to have been a really Celtic thing to do, to paint yourself with red and yellow ochres. Vraiment rouge. Yeah, look at that.
Just beyond the castle walls at Geddelon, the earthen kiln used for the firing of tiles is lined with bricks. Kilns were often owned by the local lord, who of course charged his tenants for using them. In the 13th century, regulations governing the work of local tilers in and around Toulouse specified not only the consistency and dimensions of the tiles themselves, but also the size of the kilns used, and the number of tiles permitted to be fired in any one firing. Guédelon fires 4,000 tiles at a time. Bruno Faval is the chief tile maker at Guédelon, and he and his team have presided over 15 experimental firings during the past 9 years. Each firing has enabled them to improve and finesse their techniques.
The way they're placing them in the kiln, they're leaving gaps so that when they fire this, the flames can work their way up through every single tile and hopefully you'll win even temperature, making each one hard, each one a very similar colour, and making sure there's no losses. And one of the problems with these tiles, when you dry them out, if there's any water in there and you fire it too quickly, the kiln, that water will expand because it will turn into a gas. It will blow the tile apart. You'll hear a pop. And if these are stacked incorrectly, if one tile goes, several tiles could go. They've been doing this for a number of years. They know what they're doing. A lot of this is trial and error, experimental archaeology. They know what these kilns look like from excavations that have been done in the UK, that have been done in France. Now they know how these kilns actually work because they've been working these kilns.
Out in the peace and quiet of the forest, Ruth is making an essential tool for applying her medieval paint.
So if I'm actually going to be able to paint anything that looks like something, I'm going to need a decent brush to do it with. So I went and found some badger hair. Well, I'll be honest, there was some roadkill, so I shaved it. I know it sounds a bit of a weird thing to do. So I shaved it as close to the skin as I possibly could in order to keep the hairs all as they grow naturally in order. So when I sort of grab a little tuft of it here, if I sort of try and separate a bit out. And what I want are these long, straight hairs that are what helps a badger shed water. The hair is designed to move water, which is why it makes such great brushes. I'm going to glue those hairs in place so they don't move during the next bit of the process.
The glue Ruth is using is gum arabic, hardened sap from the acacia tree, mixed with 4 parts water.
Gum arabic, of course, is water-soluble, so I'll be able to just wash it out of the brush at the end. And can you see how that's coming together now as a point? That's exactly what I want it to do as a finished brush. If you look at a modern paintbrush, there's this sort of metal bit between the hairs and the stick. The 13th century, I'm not going to mess around trying to make a metal ferrule. You just do something much, much easier and cheaper. You go and get yourself a feather. Because if you think about it, if I cut that bit off and I cut that bit off, I've got a ready-made tube. I can take a little bit of thread and bind my hairs. Just whipping them into place. As tight as I can manage. And I've got a nice, firmly held little paintbrush head, which I should be able to poke through. There we go. You can see how firmly that's in there now. See? Paintbrush head. All I need now is jam a stick in the other end. Done. That looks like it'll work, doesn't it?
The pressure's on at the tile kiln. The 13th of May in medieval France was regarded as the Day of the Holy Ice. It was believed to be the last day of spring in which a hailstorm would occur, sent by God as a sign of his omnipotence before the arrival of summer. And as hail often turns quickly to heavy rain, that could have disastrous consequences for the fate of this batch of tiles. This firing has already been held up for several days, owing to heavy storms. And once again, dark clouds are looming overhead.
The rain is coming, and we've just got to get this finished, because if these tiles get wet, it'll be a serious problem. Not only can it affect their ability to fire. Essentially, they may explode if the water gets in there. They also take an awful lot more fuel to dry this kiln out and then get it up to temperature.
Medieval tile makers would probably have used mud, earth, or wooden boards to weatherproof the tops of their kilns. But for reasons of practicality and efficiency, Guédelon relies on sheets of 21st century corrugated iron. There isn't a moment to lose.
Here it comes, the holy ice. The hail. The last time of the year you'll get hail. And almost as if on cue.
As feared, the hail quickly turns into a downpour. The kiln will remain covered for several days to allow the soil around it and the wood required for firing time to thoroughly dry out. Only once Bruno has assessed that the ground and climate conditions are optimum will the firing finally take place.
Good work, Peter, good work.
And at this rate, it may have to be postponed for several more days yet.
Glad I've got a poncho, Tomo.
While the tile firing is on hold, progress is made on the chapel tower. The guard room within the lower floor is undergoing a colourful transformation. Valerie and her colleague Aurélie Pious are using the Guédelon ochre to paint a design on the walls, known as fictive masonry. This was a popular style of artwork among the nobility and royalty throughout Europe in the mid-13th century. It was a less expensive way to create the illusion of the walls having been constructed from expensive white limestone. By lime-washing the cheaper sandstone white, and then overpainting this with a colourful fake stonework pattern, a look of grandeur and of wealth was created.
Transformation of this room is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, to think it goes from bare stone to render, to lime wash, to this. I mean, this is prestige, isn't it? In 1240, Queen of England had something very similar in her bedchambers with the addition of flowers. But, you know, it brightens the room, doesn't it? It's like visual, it's impressive.
And these fake joints made out of this ochre paint give the impression of highly cut stone.
Exactly. It's like you're replicating what's beneath it, but in a very stylish way. In a way that actually says to people coming here to visit, this is what I'm worth, I've got money, I can make this happen.
The ochre pigments would be mixed with a glue binder made from egg, or sometimes rabbit skin, to make the paint.
I'm not sure if my lines are dark enough. Uh-oh. I think I top-loaded my brush a little bit too much there. It hasn't run. That's the danger, isn't it? Too much pigment on your brush.
Yeah, do you want to touch up that bit there and then I'll nip in there?
No, it's all going wrong. It's going wrong. It's looking awful. Hideous.
Yeah. Well, I've seen worse.
Well, I know, but, you know, you should put yourself down. Oh, no.
Oh, Bruce, whoa.
Every aspect of Guédelon's design is planned by a scientific committee of experts. They work closely with the staff, so that every feature is based on authentic primary sources of historical evidence. And just a few miles away, in the village of Moutier, is a key example of that evidence. The Church of St. Peter, built around the year 1000. The church of the Middle Ages was a huge and wealthy landowner, which exerted a powerful influence over people's lives. And the interiors of its buildings often set a benchmark for the tastes and trends of the era. In the early 1980s, the white distemper covering the interior walls started to crack and peel.
This is amazing.
Uncovering a fascinating medieval secret.
Everywhere.
A painstaking conservation over the next 10 years revealed these stunning ochre murals from the 13th century. They've provided Guédelon with an authentic and illuminating resource from which to draw inspiration for the interior decor of the castle.
This is the panel that we're particularly interested in terms of the work we're doing at Guédelon.
Right.
It's amazing. You can pick out there, you can see the frieze.
Yeah.
And these 5-petal flowers, you find these all over the place. Very pop art, but it's pure 13th century. Of course, the church would have been absolutely central in people's lives. Everyone locally would have had to have come to this church. So the paintings on these walls aren't just decoration. They are here to tell stories. They can be read very much like a cartoon strip.
Oh. Almost the entertainment of the age. The biblical story just laid out in scenes.
And I like the way that the artists have also taken the opportunity to retell the story in their way. If there was any kind of friction between them and the church, look, we've got Eve here, sashaying away, being very cheeky, giving the wink to Adam, just behind here.
They have a wink. We can't see what happens behind the pillar, and then afterwards they've got a harvest and a child. So
I wonder what the reaction was, because presumably the villagers would be in on the joke. Only we knew.
Ruth is applying some of the techniques discovered at the Church of St. Peter to the bedchamber, which would have been used to provide hospitality to the Lord and Lady's most distinguished guests. It's the most highly decorated room in the castle so far, and Ruth is using the burnt red ochre paint to restore the rose motifs in the window seat.
Obviously, the domestic spaces within a castle are intended to impress. They have to look gorgeous. It's about the look of the place as much as anything else. And naturally, people painted their walls. It's not a church. This isn't about religious storytelling. This was about showing your power. It was about prestige. That up there, that little bit where it's painted to look as if it's masonry, with the little roses in front, often called stones and roses, is perhaps the most typical, as far as we can tell, of all interior decorating designs of the mid-13th century. That is what the Queen of England had on her bedroom walls in the Tower of London. Stones and roses, the very height of fashion.
Gave the old ox a handful of month-old grey. He spat it in my face and tried to carve me a new nipple.
Back at the Church of St. Peter in Moutier, Sarah explains how the paintings on these walls have informed the way in which Guédelon's interiors are decorated.
And because we don't have a lot of evidence of the types of paintings that were inside castles, we're always very careful to say to people, okay, we don't know if there was ever a bedroom painted in exactly the style that we've got at the castle, but just a stone's throw from the castle, at the same time, we're painting these same patterns, and crucially, it's the same colour palette. This is just like walking out of the quarry, isn't it? We've got the red ochre, the yellow ochres, the browns.
I have to say, I mean, you look at the masons when they come out of the quarry and that kind of, the dust and the ochre that's on them, that is your colour palette.
Absolutely. No, everything's there. So if we wanted to paint in this area with blues or greens, we'd have to buy those pigments in from further afield, and they would have been more costly. And it's interesting to see that in a church, the decision has obviously been taken not to have too much blue or green. They've used the materials that were available locally.
Artwork like this just doesn't really survive in castles. Castles are generally ruins, but churches, they're such an important historical reference.
No, that was certainly a challenge for us, in that we were aware that there are very few models of the types of paintings that there would have been inside castles at this time. It was a very deliberate decision not to use the human figures, because obviously these are depicting biblical stories. So we stuck very much with the flowers, the trees, the geometric shapes. But what we're wanting to do is offer people a vision of what a 13th century visitor might have seen, and to get over the fact that the castles weren't bare, stone, empty places. They were decorated and they were full of colour.
Another area of the castle, which is the result of intense research into 13th century architecture, is the chapel. Clément Girard, the chief stone carver at Guédelon, is a highly experienced draftsman, but he's about to undertake his most ambitious project to date.
Right now, Clément's doing the drawing for what will be the prestige feature of the chapel. So much so, they've actually imported a slightly less hard type of limestone that will be easier to carve. This really is precise work. I am marvelling at the skill he's got.
Clément is designing a decorative piece of masonry, based on a very common 13th century design found throughout France. It's a niche for the chapel wall, with a trefoil-shaped head, which will sit upon pillars, rising from two small basins called piscines. At Guédelon, white dressed limestone is used for the more decorative features of the castle. Although it's quicker to dress than the quarry's hard sandstone, it's easier to chip, so great precision is required, and mistakes could prove costly. Finally, it's the morning of the long-awaited firing of the kiln. Peter's up early to help share the workload with Florian Dubois. The firebox in the lower chamber has been stacked with logs and twigs. And at last, the first piece of kindling is lit. Within seconds, clouds of wood smoke are billowing out at the top of the firing chamber. It's going to take hundreds of armfuls of wood and many hours of careful monitoring to turn these flames into the roaring blaze required to fire the tiles. A long, hot, and exhausting day lies ahead. The stone carvers have completed the first part of the white limestone niche and are ready to transport it to the chapel tower. The hoisting of the stone requires care and attention. The Lord, and all of those working for him, would have set great store by this sacred work of art.
Well, for us, the significance is that this is the first real piece of religious architecture that we've got in the castle. This is the only sacred space within the castle. So we're actually standing here in the area where the altar will be. So this is the holiest place of this sacred space.
Where you'd have the holy water and the oils, yeah.
So this is the most delicate sculpture that we've done here. As you can see, it's a hand basin. You've seen it being dressed earlier, but you can see the two dips. Now, we had some priests visiting. We were wondering ourselves why there were these two kind of recesses. And the priests that were visiting suggested that maybe one was for washing priests' hands before the Mass, and that the other one was then for washing the implements that had been used in the Mass.
Right.
What we've been told, at least, is that the idea is that all the water that is in this piscina, this hand basin, is holy water, and as such it can't just be thrown away. All the water will actually, and we're not talking about huge amounts, but the water will just kind of filter down into the wall and stay within the walls of the chapel.
The stone of the chapel itself is obviously porous. It's going to absorb that holy water and essentially make this whole space even more sacred.
That's the idea. So our mini little temple here at Guédelon. So it's been an opportunity, obviously, for the stonemasons to use different techniques. And then there was a little bit of improvisation that gave the stonemasons an opportunity to kind of have a bit of freedom of movement. You can see each column is slightly different. This is Mathieu's. You can see his mark up here on the stone. And on the other side, we've got Jean-Paul's right here.
The mason's marks on dressed stones are a permanent reminder of the ancient skills and techniques of the medieval masons. Each one presents us with a unique signature of the craftsman who carved a particular piece. At the kiln, tension is rising. A month's rain has taken its toll, and the firing is not going to plan.
Everything got wet. The kiln got wet, the wood got wet. So it's just taken that a little bit longer to dry everything out, get rid of the moisture.
The blaze is still several hundred degrees below what it needs to be. Peter leads a frantic effort to try to save the 4,000 tiles inside. We know today the optimum temperature for successful firing is around 1,000 degrees centigrade. 13th century tilers relied on their experience, their senses, and costly trial and error. They would have been under intense pressure to get firings right.
The kiln, it's just about getting up to temperature now. It's ready to really feed up, and pretty soon those tiles will be getting close to firing, but it does mean it's going to be a longer day. I mean, the sun is setting in the sky. We're going to go late into the night.
A tiler's trade depended on the local nobility's trust and the reliability of his product. And the strict laws governing the standards of production were rigidly enforced. Tiles must be correctly stacked. The temperature must not be too high or too low. The heat must be distributed evenly throughout the kiln. If not, the results could be underfired, overfired, or otherwise damaged tiles. And the medieval lord would neither accept nor pay for a single substandard tile. Failed firing had serious consequences for a tiler's livelihood. As darkness falls, Peter and the team finally succeed in getting the temperature up to 1,000 degrees centigrade.
We've been working since this morning. without stopping, and now we are a bit tired. It was hard, but now it's at a good temperature.
Right. And what sort of colours are you looking for in there?
It must stay orange. If it's white, it's too much. If you want the tiles to be fired evenly, we must stay at this temperature during 2 hours.
Oh, right, okay. But are you happy?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, we are. Yes, it's a dream.
Yeah. Can you imagine living in a world with no electric lights? I mean, tonight we have the stars, we have the moon, and we have the tile kiln. 4,000 tiles. They're just about to block this up with wood, and they're going to seal it in. It's a lot of hard work at the coalface, because this is industry. Could you imagine what it must have been like to see a castle being built of stone, surrounded by these kilns that were firing flames into that night sky? But sat back here, thinking about perhaps the hell down there, and the heavens up there, and your tiles currently in purgatory. Which way are they going to go? Have you been good? Will they be used in that castle? Who knows?
It takes several days for the kiln to cool down. Peter's helping to unload the tiles and examine the results.
Même seulement en les, regarde, en les frottant, il n'y a pas de souci. Ouais, tac, ça c'est beau.
You can hear this?
Yeah,
It's
I can hear
really like this sound is perfect for us.
that. That ringing sound is what you're looking for.
Hey, perfect sounds.
Ah, it's a good sound.
So,
Why are you guys spitting on the tiles?
to see to see if it's cooked, because sometimes the sound is not enough.
Right.
The sound can be at the middle. We don't know if it's raw or cooked, so we can spit on it, and if the saliva stays there, it's cooked. If it's going inside, it's not.
Every single tile coming out of this kiln, you're quality controlling them. You're listening to the sound.
Yes.
If you're unsure, you spit on it. If it goes in,
Yeah,
it's
we can't
undercooked.
spit on everyone. 4,000. We don't have enough.
But what happens if they overcook?
We have an example. So it was not for this firing. It was for one before. When overcooked, it's going like that. So we have this bubble of gas inside, and the bubble is growing bigger, and the tile will burst with time. But this is good. Quality. Handmade.
Well, I saw how hard you guys worked and how long it takes to make these tiles. I mean, it's good. I'm pleased. I'm happy for you. You know?
We're happy too. Especially with this firing, we're really happy. Yes, we have very good results. Really nice to have it.
The fired tiles are now used to floor the fully rendered and lime-washed quarry tower. It will take thousands more tiles and several more years of rendering, lime washing and painting, before the entire castle finally looks like it might have done in the 13th century.
This is really starting to look like a finished castle, isn't it? You know, with the tiles and the walls all plastered and painted. It's starting to get that feel of a living space.
I'll be honest, I did not appreciate how much work and effort it would take to get this stage actually happening. You know, clay for the tiles, finding the paints. But when you see it, it's unbelievable.
And I really can't wait. I know it's a long time in the future yet, but for the furniture and the furnishings, for the textiles to finally arrive.
Well, it emphasises that it's actually a living space and not just a defensive building, doesn't it? In moments like this, you look at this, you know, yes, I could actually sit here and relax.
Yeah.
It's not all about warfare when it comes to castles.
Yeah. This is an entertaining space. Next to the Great Hall, you can bring your more select guests in here to wine them and dine them, and perhaps a guest bed in here, and everybody else sleeping around on mats. You can get the feel for that sort of convivial way of life.
I have to say, though, the medieval period, far more colourful than I thought it was.
Castles dominated the medieval landscape, and Britain has some of the finest in the world. Today, most are decaying relics, many of their secrets buried in time. Now, historian Ruth Goodman and archaeologists Tom Pinfold and Peter Ginn are turning the clock back to relearn the secrets of the medieval castle builders.
This is the ultimate in medieval technology.
The origin of our castles is distinctly French, introduced to Britain at the time of the Norman conquest of 1066.
3, 2, 1, tirez!
Here in the Burgundy region of France is Guédelon Castle, the world's biggest archaeological experiment. A 25-year project to build a castle from scratch, using the same tools, techniques, and materials available in the 13th century.
It's a lot of hard work at the coalface, because this is industry.
For the next 6 months, Ruth, Peter, and Tom will experience the daily rigors of medieval construction.
Drop down. Yeah.
And everyday life. How workers dressed and ate.
You can really smell your food.
And the art of combat. This is the story of how to build a medieval castle. Four months into their adventure, the team have been immersed in the building work, alongside Guédelon's masons.
Perfect. Oh, good.
They've learned how a castle was defended in times of war.
Every stone has to be in line, because this is going to go up and up and up.
And discovered how lavishly decorated castles were on the inside.
This was about showing your power. It was about prestige.
Now the team delve deeper to discover the secrets of the skilled communities whose combined expertise made such mighty castles.
It's just this mass of molten metal.
Castles were not made from stone alone, without the mastery of the medieval blacksmiths transforming metal. And the carpenter's sophisticated grasp of geometry.
Wow, is all I can say.
The castle could never be built at all.
This is one of those moments when everything comes together extremely fast in quite a dramatic way.
The first castles introduced to Britain by the Normans were mostly built not of stone, but of wood, making them quicker and cheaper to construct. Their favourite design was the Motte Bailey. Following the conquest of 1066, they erected hundreds at strategic locations across England and Wales. One of the first structures completed here at Guédelon is an example of a classic wooden Motte Bailey.
You know, I can never remember which one's the Motte and which one's the Bailey.
The Motte is your mound, on top of which you're probably going to end up with a wooden tower like this, which in our case in Guédelon goes on to be the Great Tower. And your Bailey is the area enclosed by your palisade fence, as we can see here. So this could be your Bailey.
So the Bailey becomes the courtyard, the palisade fence becomes the curtain of walls.
Exactly, that's the evolution of the castle right there, really, isn't it?
While most early castles were made of timber, at key sites, the Normans invested in stone, expanding on the Motte Bailey principle of high tower and defensive surrounding wall, but using materials that were far more imposing and durable. William the Conqueror built stone castles to make a statement. Norman rule was here to stay. The fact so many of these castles are still standing after almost 1,000 years is testament to the precision and skill of their builders. It's this remarkable standard of craftsmanship they're seeking to recapture at Guédelon. Most of the walls are built with rubble stones, which are easy to produce in the quarry. Every 10 feet, the masons build levelling courses, rows of carefully dressed flat stones that strengthen the wall, and also allow the masons to regulate the structure.
It's too irregular. If you're using just blocks that are shaped but not specific, you'll actually end up with a weak wall. By putting in the levelling courses, you flatten everything out, you start building again from a horizontal surface.
Hey, bring
so
that
you'll
piece
do
over
that
here.
again and again, right up to the top. And that just keeps the strength of the wall and allows you just to basically balance out and work from a flat surface.
Tom is helping to extract a particularly large stone from the quarry by the castle to use in a levelling course. Mathieu Rigaud has been a quarryman here for 9 years.
At the moment, we're just making a small hole, and into that we're going to insert the wedge. And what we want to do is hit that perfectly, and that should actually work its way along a natural crack in the rock. So it's not as simple as just smack, 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 there's your hole, put in the wedge.
Comme ça. Tu vas taper comme ça.
Ouais.
Tiens.
Each different type of rock has its own extraction method, and quarrymen's skills were handed down from father to son.
Okay, we've got our split now. We just need to separate these two bits of stone. So it's over to the crowbar, get that in. I'm going to lift it up, we're going to apply some more wedges.
In the Middle Ages, some quarrymen also worked as stonemasons. Masons were well-paid free men who enjoyed exceptional status among the workers of the age. They travelled widely, their skills constantly in demand for building great castles and churches. On a construction site, the stonemasons' lodge was where they gathered to eat, drink, and discuss ideas and design.
Heavier than blocks.
Lodges became regarded as strongly symbolic buildings, where the closely guarded secrets of the mason's craft were shared and geometry was taught. In an age where there was little scientific knowledge and a great deal of superstition, it's easy to see why a mason's lodge acquired an almost mystical status. Professor Ronald Hutton is a historian, specializing in medieval and early modern folklore.
We're sitting in a mason's lodge, and those words sort of conjure up certain images. Is that true? I mean, was there any such thing as Freemasonry in the 13th century?
Certainly not. Freemasonry as we know it comes along at the end of the 16th century. Actually in Scotland, where they decided to pull together the mason's skill of understanding geometry and structure in order to try and understand the secrets of the universe. And that began this secret society of people dedicated to knowledge, which grew into Freemasonry as we know it.
So it has absolutely nothing to do with this sort of medieval tradition of building?
Well, medieval masonry is the seed and modern Freemasonry is the full-grown plant. If you're a medieval mason, you are doing God's work. You're building God's houses, the churches and cathedrals. And as God is the grand architect of the universe using natural geometry, so human masons reproduce that. They are sub-creators, but are also in a highly mobile, skilled, dangerous trade. That's why a lodge like this is so important. If you are a free mason in the medieval sense, in other words, you're free to go where you like, to have a place like this, a temporary home from home, where masons can gather, share information, share hot tips, and simply live, play dice, booze, chill out after the day's work is done, is absolutely essential.
Stonemasons were not the only skilled craftsmen on the castle building site. Castles required huge amounts of wood, and this called for carpenters. Roof structures, doors, walkways and drawbridges were all made from timber. Wood was also key to the building process, from scaffolding and lifting machinery to basic buckets.
Here at Guédelon, the wooden scaffolding is a really visible part of the build. It's also one of the most precarious and potentially dangerous. Indeed, we know that in 1138 at Canterbury Cathedral, William Sens, the master builder, was up inspecting the high vaults when he fell from the scaffolding and was paralysed.
Well, perhaps it was simply a bad match. These things do happen from time to time.
Essential to secure scaffolding are potlogs, the timbers which stick out from the wall for the scaffold planks to rest on. The timbers are deeply embedded in the walls in potlog holes, into which the logs are inserted.
Perhaps it was simply a bad match.
By planning potlog holes at regular intervals, the timbers can be continually raised in line with the stonework, avoiding the need to build a scaffold up from the ground.
Carpenter and stonemason are problem.
Florian Ranucci is the master mason, overseeing all construction on the site. He's ultimately responsible for workers' safety here at
sirs
Guédelon.
and ladies.
Obviously, we don't want anybody to die when we're building this castle. So there are certain compromises. You're having to have some modern health and safety issues with the scaffolding. How close is the scaffolding you're using to being 13th century scaffolding, and how much is because you need modern health and safety?
Well, the 21st century technique for us to work is only to put iron,
right,
and also modern wood.
So when we look around us, the 13th century scaffolding wouldn't have looked very different. The wood would have been hand-produced, not machine-produced. And instead of the bolts, what would it have been instead of the bolts?
Ropes.
Ropes. It would have just been tied.
Yes. So we have to do
a bit of compromise.
a compromise for our safety and for building in a good way.
Yeah.
But we don't change the way of building. We use wood.
The completed castle will have a chapel built into the east tower, where the Lord and his family could practice their religious devotions. Even laymen would have heard Mass at least once a day, so a chapel was considered essential. Nicolas Touchefeu is head carpenter here. They must get the scaffolding in place to enable the masons to build the next level of the chapel tower.
Come one, come all. Feast your eyes on our fine selection.
The masons have made a potluck hole, and the carpenters have prepared the wood in advance. Complete with a mortise and tenon joint, something still favoured by carpenters today.
There we go. So not only do you have a mortise and tenon here that can be pegged, you've also got a bird mouth joint. So the putt log is actually sitting on this as well as in it to give it maximum security. And then that putt log goes into the castle wall. Pegs?
This side.
This side?
It's secured with oak pegs.
More? No?
Okay.
Okay. And that is the scaffolding. In, the build can commence.
As well as the stonemasons being largely dependent on the carpenters, both were also reliant on another set of craftsmen. Blacksmiths. From hinges on doors to bars on windows or the chains that raised a drawbridge, metal was crucial.
Come all. Feast your eyes on our fine selection.
At the foot of the castle is a blacksmith's forge. Martin Claudel produces the tools and metalwork required at Guédelon. Peter and Tom are helping mix crushed clay with sand and water. They're going to help build a furnace, or bloomery, to smelt iron for tool making.
Think about a blacksmith shop, you think about all the little bits of metal kicking around, bits of broken nail, bits of fragments of iron that come off where you're smacking it with a hammer. And this furnace is a way of melting those all down and turning them back into metal that can be used. These big old bellows. That's good.
Once the furnace is complete, they just need to put in the door, held in with an ash paste so they can easily open it. The giant double bellows are attached to the furnace to pump air into it when lit, raising the temperature from 800 to over 1,300 degrees, sufficient to melt the scrap iron and steel.
It's a lovely melodic sound with the bellows.
It's respiration.
Breathing in and out.
No, it should absolutely be placed over there.
We've made the bloomery, we've made the furnace. We're going to put in charcoal, we're going to throw in the scrap iron, bring it up to temperature, melt this down, and hopefully at the bottom we're going to get, at the very least, reusable iron, but perhaps we'll get steel. But that's all about your carbon content, the purity of the fuel, and the ability to do a good smelt.
Steel is iron with a specific amount of carbon dissolved inside its structure. When the temperature in the furnace rises, more and more carbon from the charcoal is absorbed by the iron. But it's a difficult balancing process. This was medieval technology, long before a modern understanding of chemistry. But hard steel was so useful for tools that even small amounts were precious.
And pretty soon, we'll be ready to crack open that door and hopefully have a bloom of steel from which we can make tools. We've reached that moment. The iron that's gone in the top has melted, it's reached the bottom, it's hopefully turned into a steel bloom. Clément is just packing out that sort of ash and water paste that Tomo used to patch up that door. Oh, door's off. We can see the bloom. It's right at the top of that charcoal bed. It's just this mass of molten metal. All those scrap bits of metal melted down. Ah.
Tu me dis quand je tourne, hein?
Tourne là. Voilà, là, dessus.
It's amazing to see this happen in a blacksmith shop. I've never seen that before. It just means that these guys are self-sufficient.
They need to compact the bloom to start the folding process for working it, to shape into tools. Next, the metal is rapidly cooled or quenched in water to lock in its hardness. Martin then tests it with a steel file. Parts that feel softer than the file are iron. Harder bits are hopefully steel.
But if we got steel, we just have to work it to see.
Being able to produce hard steel enabled blacksmiths to make sharp cutting edges of tools like axes, which is what Martin is going to forge later. In the Middle Ages, the lords of castles like this one were part of the driving force behind the clearance of woodland to make way for crops and to provide timber and firewood. There are more forests in France today than there were in the 13th century. The location of Guédelon Castle was determined in part by the surrounding forest, which provides large amounts of wood.
This is our tree.
Oh, it has got a good bend on it, hasn't it?
Toi, tu fais comme ça.
Jean-Michel Houret is the head woodsman.
Relax, relax, regarde, la main.
He gives the team a lesson in using medieval-style wood axes to fell a tree.
La main.
It's going to take us ages.
Trees were selected with specific uses in mind, depending on their size and shape.
Faut leur expliquer qu'il faut que ça soit comme un gros crayon en fait. Hein.
You're trying to make it look like a big pencil at the bottom.
Sarah Preston, the site administrator, is helping overcome the language barrier.
Ah, le bras, attention. Ça mériterait d'être plus lisse. Là, il a tapé là, pour que ça soit plus...
Yeah, sure.
Ouais.
Don't look over this side then.
He's a terrible mess.
So Jean-Michel's saying we're getting to the final stages now. What he can't tell us is where the tree will fall exactly.
So it could actually fall back this way.
Potentially. So what you're going to do is keep working. So you keep working, and at one point you will start to hear the tree cracking. Don't stop.
It's so easy now to go and get your lump of wood or get your bit of stone. Or the raw materials of life are easy to acquire. When you see how much work is involved in the simplest of things.
And not just that, it's the tools to get those raw materials. And you're looking at the complete tool set of the woodsman.
Yeah.
And it's something that's totally been forged in that blacksmith's area, and it is going to last a lifetime.
And they would have cost a fortune, really, for an ordinary working man. I mean, the tools of your trade, people pass them down in families because you have to. They're too expensive to acquire. This is definitely a spectator sport, I've decided.
It is, yeah. It's very easy to critique someone's axe skills from
it
a
is,
distance.
isn't it? I can see a whole new game show coming up now.
Can you hear the crack yet, Tomo?
I can hear it cracking. I don't know if it's actually the tree or me.
It is always one of the things I like about these experiments, is seeing how much skill there is in the simplest of things and how much intelligence and cleverness there is.
Are you calling Tomo simple?
Maybe it seems simple. Maybe that's more accurate.
Part of the woodsman's skill is to plan so the tree falls safely in the right place, without breaking on impact.
Oh!
Once the trunk has been squared up, it will be used by the carpenters up on the chapel tower. Much of a castle owner's wealth came from exploiting his land and its tenants. One way of doing this was to build water mills, providing a regular source of income. These mills would have made a huge difference to the lives of local villagers and labourers. Producing flour for their bread required up to 2 hours a day of hand grinding. But one mill could produce as much grain as around 40 people grinding by hand. According to the Doomsday Book, in England, as early as 1080, there were over 5,500 water mills. Little is known about the mills of this time. However, one of the most ambitious projects at Gevenon this year is the construction of a 12th century style watermill. The castle team and archaeologists have based its design on the remains of 2 ancient mills, discovered in Jura, in the east of France in 2008. Sophie Windsor is one of a team of carpenters who've painstakingly worked on the watermill over a 2-year period. Today is the moment of truth.
Today we are going to try to make some flour in the watermill. So we are going to open the sluice, the water is going to run, and hopefully the wheel is going to turn and grind some grain.
So being able to do this, you can actually see it working and relate it back to the evidence you found in the archaeological record.
Yeah. So this is why it's absolutely experimental archaeology. That's why we tried several times, and each time we have maybe to change some pieces and to do some modification. So I think you can start by opening the sluice.
Get the water down there.
Yes, and then we will need someone to watch if the wheel is all right with the paddles and everything stays. So there is an emergency stop here with somebody ready to close it, because if there is something in the mechanism, it destroys everything in a minute.
And that's a lot of work, really, very quickly. So
we can say that.
Emergency sluice. That sluice. People making sure those paddles are fine.
Yeah, and checking if there is no big trouble in the gear.
Yeah. Boom.
Stuffing across, bridging it.
Oh, wow.
Right. Better get down to our second station.
But there's a problem. The mill wheel isn't turning nearly as quickly as it ought to be.
It means that we don't have enough pressure.
Right. So the grain isn't coming out.
No, it's not going down. It's all from wood, so it's a lot of friction everywhere. So resistance, and we have to find solutions.
You can hear the noise, can't you? The noise of the woods.
And also, it's true that the stones have to get a bit used. And then it will be a bit smoother. Everything is still new as well. It needs to be used a bit.
Yeah.
And this is experimental archaeology, so everything that's going on here is all about trying to work out exactly how these worked. I mean, it's easy to think of a watermill in terms of water management, and the water is coming down the sluice and it is going into this wheel. But the problem is, it's not sufficient to drive this mill. There's too much friction currently in the mechanism. So although the stones are going round, they're only going round because we're helping them out. So we just need to fine-tune this a little bit more to get this working perfectly. But we're very close, very close.
2 years of painstaking research and building could be in vain if the problems can't be remedied. But Peter and Tom are hopeful that some simple modifications and liberal application of lubricating pig fat will solve the teething problems and get the mill working properly.
Don't be shy, good sirs and ladies.
Perhaps the most essential part of the blacksmith's role was keeping the workforce equipped. The stonemason's tools become blunt after a few days' work. Without a blacksmith to sharpen them, all the stone cutting on site would come to a halt in less than a week. Because iron and steel were so costly, tools needed to last as long as possible. But today, the blacksmiths are making a new side axe.
You work together as a team. You hit, Vincent hits, but you don't talk. It's all quiet. Is that just experience, or you're listening to the sound?
Yes, it's experience. We used to work together, and we have a code. When I let my hammer strike on the anvil, it means stop.
That's it. So in all the noise of working in the forge, it doesn't actually matter. It's a visual sign as well. That's it.
A piece of hard steel will be welded onto an iron axe head to make a hard cutting edge.
Blade is starting to taper down, and we're going to cut it any minute now. Right?
Okay.
Tom has a go at cutting steel.
It's not as easy as I thought it would be. Oh, we're making some progress. What the guys are doing is just measuring up the steel against the iron axe head. It needs to be pretty precise.
Until modern times, few methods of accurately measuring temperature existed. So blacksmiths traditionally judged it by watching the changing colour of the metal. Once the iron is white hot, the hard cutting steel can be welded onto it.
It's taken a lot of work to make this axe, but when you think about it, it's a crucial tool for building the castle, making the water mills, shaping anything that's required, like scaffolding. You can't do without an axe. And these guys are working hard constantly to just make sure those tools are available for the entire site.
The climax of the process, changing the qualities of metals, was one of the medieval blacksmith's most carefully guarded secrets. Martin heats the axe to a critical temperature, which changes the steel structure. He then quenches it in vegetable oil, which locks in this new hardness without distorting the blade as water might. The side axe is finally sharpened on stone. Medieval stonemasons may have been revered, but many held the blacksmith's craft as supernatural.
Blacksmiths were intensely magical because since prehistory, they'd performed this extraordinary sorcery of conjuring metal from rock and then fashioning it into beautiful things. Medieval blacksmiths were regarded as great healers. A pregnant woman afraid of labor, a sick child, an adult with a lingering illness would be laid upon a blacksmith's anvil, and the blacksmith would pretend to hammer them, to hammer the illness out of them. And people really believed that, like royalty, they had the power to heal by touch.
Was that something that was considered to be dangerous magic, or was it just part of life and nobody batted an eyelid?
It's pretty scary. Blacksmiths are often believed to make pacts with the devil, ironically, in which the blacksmith usually comes off better. For example, blacksmiths are believed to be the only people who can do jobs for the devil, like shoeing his black horses, without paying the price of their soul. And there are even tales of blacksmiths, some of them saints, who are capable of grabbing the devil's nose in their red-hot pincers and tweaking it to get rid of him if he's annoying.
How on earth did the church respond to that?
The church canonized some of these blacksmiths. St Dunstan in England is a classic case. Otherwise, they simply got along with it. Blacksmiths were too useful, and as long as they went to mass and didn't have an alternative kind of religion, there's no problem.
Here at Geddelon, carpenters, stonemasons and archaeologists have spent weeks modifying the mill mechanisms and the water channel. Peter and Tom are going to attempt to grind their bag of grain.
We are going to start with the wheel.
Philippe Delage has been closely involved in the mill project from the beginning.
We are going to turn.
And he's going to help them try it out.
Wow. You can hear that stone singing. It's unbelievable how many pieces, man-made, each one of them, actually involved in this wheel alone, let alone the rest of the actual building.
Yeah. It's a lot of wood.
It's a lot of wood.
All right, good. We got enough water. Thomas, maybe you can open the van?
The sluice gate here?
Yeah, that's it. You know, you use this timber.
A bit of just leverage.
Right,
and
it goes.
After you put
Keep it wedged
this
open.
one underneath, like this.
And that will just control the amount of water we let through.
Yes. So we are going to climb upstairs.
Shout out loud when it's time for me to.
You're controlling our power, man.
Flower power.
Fill the hopper with grain. It's ready to be made into flour.
Yeah.
I suppose all we need is Tom to open that gate.
Yeah. You are ready, Thomas? Ready. You can open.
Here it comes. Tom's opening the sluice gates. Water's coming down. About to hit the wheel. It's about to hit the wheel. Hit the wheel.
The mill has a paddle wheel, 8 feet in diameter. This turns an axle, turning the smaller pit wheel. The teeth of this turn the lantern wheel, which turns the spindle. This powers the millstone, over 3 feet in diameter. The bottom stone, the bedstone, is fixed, and the top one, the runner stone, revolves to grind the grain.
The water's turning that wheel, and our stones are going.
Finally, the mill is operating as intended, recreating an extraordinary feat of medieval engineering.
Right now, I can really appreciate how precise everything has to be. This isn't pinpoint accurate. It's going to damage it. So, Peter, how's it going? Have we got flour?
We're getting... Yeah, it's brilliant. It's superb. I mean, yeah. Wow. Wow is all I can say. You built this?
No, it's okay.
This is heavier than it looks. I
can't believe such a low head. I mean, that water is falling maybe a metre, going under a wheel. You're managing to turn a stone that is 200 kilograms, and you're managing to grind your grain into flour. This is the beginning of industry, I suppose. And to have this associated with a castle, you can free up people from the daily grind to do other things. It's amazing. Oh, here he comes. Have some power.
Oh, let's see what we got. Is that it?
What do you mean, is that it?
Oh, fantastic.
Philippe, are you happy?
I think it's a good start.
I mean, it's just amazing how much work it actually takes to create one mill. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of bits of wood, these massive bits of stone, to channel all that power from the water. Now, this is a big effort, but if you're going to create bread, you've got to feed families, soldiers, workforces. It's all worth it.
Yeah.
Exactly. It all comes back. What does the castle need? It needs to be fed. And this is what makes it happen.
And once it was up and running, as well as producing food for the inhabitants of his castle, the Lord could start making money from his mill. Tenants on his land would have been obliged to use it and pay for the privilege. The next major project at the castle is to build a wooden walkway, or gallery, on the inside of the chapel tower. This would allow soldiers to get from the main building to the castle walls, without disturbing the sanctity of the Lord's chapel. In the Middle Ages, carpenters used geometry to plan their wooden structures. They drew on the floor because parchment was expensive and paper still very rare. The carpenters are planning a section of the gallery by marking out a full-scale plan.
Every piece of wood in Gedlon Castle starts its life here on the tracing floor. First of all, the plans. They are drawn on the floor to a one-to-one scale.
Medieval units of measurement were not standardized, varying from place to place.
Isn't it interesting watching them work to how few numbers come into it? It's mathematics, but it's mathematics of proportions, geometry. It's, you know, 2 of this, 3 of that, halve it, double it, quarter it, third it. It's not 0.652.
In French, the word for thumb, pouce, is the same as the word for inch. Every site would have its own units of measurement.
That's a thumb, isn't it? So it's an inch.
The pouce.
The pouce.
Palm.
Which I suppose is the length of your palm.
Palm.
So that's your hand span.
I like the fact the inch corresponds to the word for thumb. I really like that.
I rather like the fact that feet and inches and yards is something that used to be right across Europe. You know, we tend to think of it as a very British thing these days. It's just that we hung on to it when everybody else left it behind.
Yeah.
But it used to be that there were all these little inches, all these little feet all over the place, everywhere different.
But the system of measurement here at Gedlon is based on a medieval castle that's very close by. And if we were to turn up there at the start of the build in the 13th century, on a board, it would say, this is what an inch is on this site, this is what the
based
palm
on
span
one person's
is,
body. We
the
don't know
hand
quite
span
which
is.
person's body, but based on somebody's body.
And if they were to pass away, those would have been written down to be used until the end of the build.
To make a straight line on the tracing floor,
it needs to be quite tight.
They use string with red ochre powder.
Pull it quite high. Yep, okay.
Corresponding lines are made on each section of wood before matching them to the floor plan.
then they are levelled out, and then they're plumbed up. So you're constantly jiggling it, very, very subtle, little wedges going in to make sure everything's perfect.
Once everything is lined up, they can cut the joints. They also chisel carpenter's marks into the wood. These are a code to identify the pieces of the frame, making it easier to reassemble on the castle walls. Each team would have had their own code. Finally, they assembled the completed frame.
This is the gallery. I mean, I can't believe from a few simple lines drawn on the tracing floor that we have this amazing structure ready to go into the castle. And here at Gedlon, they almost think that carpentry, it's almost a form of genius. There's so much thinking involved. I mean, this line running through all these beams, it's precise. This can be unassembled by the carpenters. It can be put to one side, can be hoisted up, reassembled outside the chapel tower. Doesn't need to be the same carpenter because you've got all the marks here. It is a flat-pack medieval gallery. This is going to flip up this way. My feet would be down here. This is a handrail. There will be spindles here. My head would be here, and I'd be looking out onto the courtyard. And this is how you build a castle.
It's thought about 30 people would live in a castle like this, from the lord and his family down to servants and guards. They would have been fed from the castle kitchen, and bread would have been the staple of all their diets, made in the stone bread oven.
So it's spongy and quite nice, look at that.
Ruth and Tom are going to try making a basic bread with flour from the new mill. Ruth is using a rising agent, which was popular in the Middle Ages.
Smells a bit of alcohol in it.
Yeah. Well, sourdough is probably the most ancient method of raising bread because there's next to nothing involved, you know, you're just saving a bit from the previous day's batch. When I made the last batch of bread, I just broke a little bit of dough off and put it to one side. And I popped it in some water with a fresh little bit of flour. And this is the result.
So sourdough is literally sourdough.
Yeah, it is.
There's no trick.
There's no trick. There's no trick to it at all. So I've not added any yeast, and I won't add.
And this is going to be an awesome carbohydrate for us, a real staple diet.
It is. I mean, this is your real basic working man's bread.
I mean, I'll be honest, at the moment it doesn't look that appealing, but I guess you've got work for me to do.
Well, do you want to give it a need? Go on. I'm
Do I
a big
add any of this?
Yeah, add a little bit at a time and just start working it in. So it is fingers in, like you were mixing lime putty, you know, that sort of thing.
Turning it in.
Turning
like making
it in.
cement.
That's it.
I mean, it's starting to look a bit more how I imagine bread would look at this
Bread
stage.
right, yeah.
I thought I was coming in for a break. Coming to the kitchen, you said.
Well, it's not my fault you admitted you'd never made bread.
And were these like family affairs or a proper big business? How would a baker make his money?
Well, the majority of bread was made at home on a family scale.
Right, okay,
By
so
women.
you wouldn't go out and buy, you'd actually have it in-house.
In the 13th century, most of it is being homemade. Okay, that's behaving much more like a lump now, isn't it?
You think, work is involved in this at every stage. It's massive.
It is,
effort,
isn't it? It is a big effort. So you're happy with that? So just roll it into a nice loaf shape. All right, lovely.
Yeah.
And then I want you to make a deep, very fast cross. That means that it's broken surface tension. It's easy for the loaf to rise. And you also get more high-quality crust for your crumb.
Okay, so 2 cuts, nice
Donk,
and quick.
donk. That's the one.
Burning wood heats the oven and is then raked out before the bread is placed inside.
That's pretty warm.
Do you fancy
Rake
raking
out?
out?
I can do that. So why am I doing this, Ruth? It seems incredibly dangerous.
It is incredibly dangerous, you're right there.
It's just a bit
But
of fun,
basically,
isn't
we
it?
don't need the fire anymore. The fire has done its job. It's heated the stones, it's brought them up to cooking temperature, and now we need to get the oven clean, ready for the bread to go in.
Right.
And we also want to put a little bit of steam in there so that it will help that final rise. Just scrape it all to the side so you've got access to the fire. That is your 13th century oven health and safety, that little move there. That's your safety. Right, next job. We've got a mop that's been soaking. You need to just quickly mop out the oven. You're not just cleaning, you're also adding steam.
That's a mop, is it?
That's a mop. You're going to get it in and throw it around.
Okay.
That's it. And you can see how that water doesn't just turn to steam, it just sort of seems to almost explode into steam. Look, oven's dry. Your next challenge is to get it on your pail.
Right.
There we go. Make sure it's sliding on the pail. It is. There you go.
Sticking it in.
Right bang in the middle.
Bang in the middle.
That's it. Done.
Oh, look at that go.
Yeah. I'll give you a shout when it's done.
Okay. I'll go back. Back to work then.
While the bread bakes, Tom tries out the side axe Martin made to square up wood, creating flat faces from a rounded trunk.
This is the weirdest axe I've ever used. It's that the balance is all off. So we've got a cutting edge and a flat side, and that actually helps to cut, but also force some of these fibres apart. Put the axe down like this, you can actually see the pole is slightly tilted, and that allows you to work along the wood nice and close. But because you're holding it here, there's no risk to your knuckles or your fingers as you work. But what it comes down to, and what I'm having trouble with, is that fine tuning. I know what I want to do, I can see what's marked out for me, but I'll be honest, it's always happening that way. Okay, moments of truth, Ruth.
How's your loaf done?
It looks quite a dark loaf. Was that the intention?
Dark. You mean burn? You mean burnt?
I'm not a baker, so I don't want to make that, that claim. Oh.
Looks like we've got the oven a bit hot.
All right, let's have a...
Whisker out. That is definitely burnt.
That's like a sausage at the barbecue, isn't it? You could probably still eat it. Oh, that's on fire on the bottom.
Oh, it's cooked, definitely.
Sounds healthy.
That oven was too hot. It shouldn't scorch like that in that time. Oh well, we'll scrape it off and hey.
Exactly. My first loaf of bread. I'm going to eat it.
The wooden gallery is ready to be installed beside the chapel tower.
Oui.
Picking a pocket.
Time for beer.
Yeah.
Each carpenter is going to take a post, myself and Tomo, just here at the handrails to make sure it doesn't topple over that way. They're going to remove the chocks, and the 3 posts are going to sink down. The mortars and tenon joints will come together, and this gallery will be locked in place, ready to take the final roof section that covers it in. Here we go. Chocks out. Oh.
C'est bon, Nicolas?
And the gallery's in place.
With the basic frame in place, long beams are now needed for the roof section.
Tomo. Sorry, mate.
Push. Sorry. Up.
Straight up, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
After all that slow work where people seem to work for hours and hours and hours and produce very little, this is one of those moments when everything comes together extremely fast in quite a dramatic way.
And
When you are ready. Up. I'm going to...
Yeah. Drop down.
Yeah.
Yep, there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Et il faut l'envoyer vers moi.
With a bit of force, the joints go into place and are pegged into position.
Just need to pop a roof on it, and there you are. We've got a link between the Great Hall and the curtain wall.
It's physical work, but to think when we first saw that drawing of what this was going to look like,
yeah,
I didn't think we'd actually see this at the end of it. It's brilliant.
A water mill would also have a mill pond, owned by the Lord, which was a source of fish. And castle workers might well have been rewarded for their hard work with a fish supper.
That is a scary beast.
It is, isn't it?
Pike was a favoured dish at feasts throughout the Middle Ages.
So freshwater fish was actually quite highly prized.
Yeah. And pike more so than things like salmon and trout. Yeah, that is a medieval fish and a half. Ham full of leavies, fat hen, lovely medieval vegetable.
And you're not doing anything to this pike?
No, just shove him on as he is. So, half an hour, should be done.
Yes, 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 yes.
Oh, don't drop the fish. They smell good. Okay, straight to table, I say.
Straight to table.
The pike is ready for presentation to Sophie, Philippe, and others who worked so hard, building the mill and gallery.
Here we go.
Wow, look at that. That's very impressive. Nice catch.
Love to caught that myself.
I also want to note I have brought something to this meal in honour of the carpenters, you see.
That's no way to treat your first loaf.
Wow. Brutal.
Oh, that's
Look at that. See how soft that is?
It's got a good crumb.
Good crumb. You want to break some up for the people over there? Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Ruth.
Philippe, having worked the mill, what do you think of the bread coming out? I mean,
it's not bad.
Look how solid pike flesh is. See, this is why it's one of the king of fish. You can actually carve it into finger-sized pieces. Which is the point. You're supposed to be able to pick it up with your fingers. And, yeah.
Wow, that actually is really good. I mean,
It's
genuinely.
right, isn't it?
Really nice. And I always thought pike was really bony and so therefore really hard to eat, but...
Well, it's not particularly, is it?
There's a lot of meat. And it's quite an intimidating looking fish when you think about it.
Oh, you should have seen him when he was still fresh. Jeepers.
I think we should drink to the mill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cheers.
To the meal.
Santé.
Cheers. Santé. À la vôtre. Voilà.
Castles dominated the medieval landscape. And Britain has some of the finest in the world. Most today are decaying relics, many of their secrets buried in time. Now, historian Ruth Goodman and archaeologists Tom Pinfold and Peter Ginn are turning the clock back to relearn the secrets of the medieval castle builders.
This is the ultimate in medieval technology.
The origins of our castles are French, introduced to Britain at the time of the Norman conquests of 1066.
3, 2, 1, tirez!
Here in the Burgundy region of France is Guédelon Castle, the world's biggest archaeological experiment. A 25-year project to build a castle from scratch, using the same tools, techniques and materials available in the 13th century.
It's a lot of hard work at the coalface, because this is industry.
For the next 6 months, Ruth, Peter and Tom will experience the daily rigors of medieval construction.
Drop down. Yep.
And everyday life. How workers dressed, ate,
You can really smell your food.
and the art of combat. This is the story of how to build a medieval castle. It's September. After 6 months of working on the castle, the team are nearing the end of their stay. They're up at dawn to start their day on the Great Tower.
Oh, I love the view from up here first thing in the morning.
I know, you can see for miles, can't you?
I'm always really amazed, you know, when you think about how far medieval people travelled. You have this image in your head, don't you, of people sticking in their own village all their lives, and then you start looking at the evidence and people move miles and miles across the whole continent. Ordinary people like us, which I just find quite exciting.
Well, when you think about it, if you've got the skill set and you've got the tools, it's almost like a ticket to ride, isn't it? You can get out there because people need you.
Talented builders and craftspeople were in constant demand for construction work. A job that could see them travel the world.
I suppose once this project was finished, workers like ourselves, we would have had to have moved on, moved to the next castle. And that might have been the next town, could have been the next country.
So there must have been 13th century ordinary working people who were better travelled and had a wider world view than many modern people.
One group of craftsmen that travelled widely from project to project were the stonecutters, elite members of the construction team. Usually free men, their experience of different sites made them experts in both military and religious architecture. In the 13th century, a mason like Clément Guérard might even have been on crusade, gathering influences from distant lands.
This is your wooden template?
Yes.
You've got from the tracing floor?
At the entrance of the chapel, there's going to be an ornate arch of alternating black and white stone. Peter and Clément are working on the first piece, but it's a complicated shape.
It's very special. Here it's round.
Yeah.
It's arch.
Yeah. Ah, right.
But
yeah.
here it's a right angle.
Right.
I ate just this small part. I need right angle here.
The stone will form the base of the arch. It must fit precisely into the existing walls, but it will also determine the shape of the curve. If it's even slightly wrong, the whole arch will be misshapen. Once the shape has been marked out, Clément uses a tool called a pitch to break off larger pieces of stone.
This is a bit of pith, this is a bit of sandstone. This is very, very hard, it's very, very black, and it's going to intersperse with the limestone. But because it's harder, it has to be dressed in a slightly different way.
You remember when it's black, it's very good quality.
Yeah.
It's the same granite.
Right.
It's very hard stone.
The pith is black and hard because of its high iron content, and takes 4 times as long to dress as limestone. It was used alongside white stones to make a strong visual statement.
When you are here, you come middle.
Ah, right.
Okay.
Always to the middle. Always to
the
the middle. Okay.
A hard-ended tool called a punch was used to finish the job.
This is different, isn't it? As you say, it's so much harder. So it's just a different technique, different tools.
Yes. In sandstone, no chisel.
No chisel.
No chisel. It's
Right.
too hard.
Masons were paid according to how many stones they dressed. So the final job is to add an identifying mason's mark to the stone.
And now you make your mark on the top. Perfect. With old chisel.
Yeah. Okay.
And just on the line, and poke. Poke.
Using these marks, archaeologists have been able to trace the movement of particular masons through the landscape.
So we have a T for Tom, a P, Peter, and an R for the roost.
By the 1200s, medieval Europe was a busy, developing, connected place as workers and traders moved across the continent. A network of roads brought produce from across the world, exotic luxuries like silks and spices. The textile industry was at its peak in 13th century Europe, and castles were a major consumer of fabrics. One of the most important elements of the industry was the trade in dyes.
This is woad, the stuff that produces a blue dye. And it grows quite well in Britain, but in France, the climate means that it has a much higher concentration of the active ingredients that produce the blue. By the 13th century, it had become quite an important cash crop in northern France, where large quantities were grown and processed and sold right across northern Europe.
Karin Grunau is an expert in traditional dyeing techniques.
Why are we cutting it rather than pulling it, Karen?
Because we need just the leaves, we don't need the roots, and it will grow up again. So 2 or 3 times in a year we can cut it.
So you get several harvests out of the same plants. Well, that's useful, isn't it? It doesn't look very blue at the moment, does it?
The woad leaves don't last long in their fresh form, so they were specially prepared before they could be sold.
I'm not seeing any blue. It still looks just like green leaves.
First, we have to ground these cut leaves, and then we have to make balls. This will open up a little bit the leaves, and the first blue will come out.
So, for the moment, there's no colour coming out of that at all. How on earth people discovered this, I don't know.
Pick up the pace!
When the woad is ground up, enzymes are released, which start to convert chemicals in the leaves into the blue dye.
And this first stage in which we're pressing it into balls, that's also about transport.
This is for the transport. It is easier to transport these balls than the leaves.
And then as this dries, the first chemical processes are happening.
Yes, you will see when it is dry, this will be a little bit blue.
The colour is changing already. I mean, it's got a bluey tinge to it, hasn't it? I mean, it's still obviously green, but it's a slightly more bluey green. Well, there's my first one.
Today, the forests at Guédelon provide a plentiful source of wood for building the castle. But this wasn't always the case. From the 11th century, huge forest clearances occurred across Europe as farms and towns expanded and new castles were built. Tom is helping to fetch some wood to make a new door.
One of the great things about spending time at Guédelon is actually getting to work with the horses. When you think about the amount of wood needed to build a castle, there is no better way than to get out here with a horse, tie it up, and off we go.
The forests at Guédelon spanned 12 hectares. But today, as in the 13th century, wood is a valuable commodity and must be treated with care.
Right now, taking this log out, we're allowed to drag it because basically it's not been shaped yet, it's not been worked. So the ground, it doesn't matter if it comes into contact with the bark.
Medieval woodcutters would have been based out in the forest, felling and processing the wood for the carpenters. A new door is needed for the castle, and the first stage is to split a tree trunk into planks.
Jean-Michel showed me these natural splits in the wood, and this is what we need to work off. We need to follow these to get our planks.
Using wedges means it's possible to split timber of any size. They're hammered into a small cut at the top of the trunk, following the natural weaknesses in the wood.
I can actually start to hear the crackling of the wood as it's starting to split.
Once split into planks, the outer ring of sapwood must be removed.
You see here, this sapwood up to the bark, this is going to be infested with insects and also maintain the moisture a bit more. We want to work with this. This is solid, this is hard, won't rot. This has to go.
The planks in the door will be held together using a mortise and loose tenon joint. The mortise is the hole and is made using an auger.
So I've got to make sure I'm lined up in the middle of the mortise. I've got to make sure I don't go forwards, backwards, to the sides.
Mortise and tenon joints date back thousands of years and were used in the construction of Stonehenge.
He hasn't told me to stop yet, so I must be doing something right.
A line of holes are drilled on each side of the plank, and then the center is chiseled out to complete the mortise.
This tenon should slide reasonably easily in like that. I'm now going to bring this across.
The loose tenon is threaded through each plank in the door.
So we'll put the other two planks there, and the next stage will be to peg it.
Making doors required advanced planning. The planks won't be pegged in place until the wood is seasoned for a year. When planks are fixed too early, they shrink, and gaps open up between them in the door.
This may seem like a complicated design and a lot of work, but it's actually based on medieval examples, and this door would have lasted hundreds of years.
Blue was very fashionable in medieval France, after being adopted as the heraldic color of royalty. As Europe's largest exporter, French woad was of huge economic importance. Once dry, the woad is ground into a powder. To complete its transformation into a dye, a special ingredient is needed.
And now you have to put urine on.
That'll be this pot that's smelling so foul, okay?
Yes, of course.
Everything you ever need chemical-wise in the past is supplied by urine, as far as I can work out.
The ammonia in the urine enables chemical reactions to complete the production of the dye. Lime is also added, which helps it form a sediment.
Now we have to ground it again to have at the end the real blue powder.
It's quite a complicated process.
It is very
isn't
complicated.
it?
And now we know because it is so expensive. Because at the end, your powder, you have just 1-2 kilos of powders from a hectare of leaves.
The powdered dye is dissolved in an alkaline solution known as a vat. There is no oxygen in the vat, which alters the dye, making it look yellow.
So now, in goes the first skein of silk into the vat. And I'm trying to introduce it gently, so I put not too much oxygen into the vat. In it goes. So how long will we have to wait?
This is the question. The longer it stays, the deeper will the blue be.
Oh, look at that changing.
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's sort of looking the same colour as the vat. And as it comes out,
it will be blue.
It's green.
When the silk is taken out, the dye molecules react with the oxygen in the air to slowly produce the final blue colour.
It is beginning to change colour.
Yeah.
It's darkening.
Yeah, it will be blue, I'm sure.
Look how blue that bit there's gone by my finger.
Using the woad as well as other dyes, Ruth will produce a huge range of colours.
If I have to spend another winter now,
Medieval builders would have used ideas from castles and cathedrals across Europe. Master mason Florian Ranucci has brought Peter to the town of Vézelay, to the Basilica of St. Mary Magdalene. The basilica was an extremely important church in the late 12th century, the place where Richard the Lionheart set off on the Third Crusade. Florian has drawn inspiration for the chapel arch from a particular architectural feature at Vézelay.
All the architecture looks from example coming from Byzantine or Roman art. For instance, they do use the two kind of stone.
You've got a Romanesque arch with black stone, white stone, black stone, white stone. This is Romanesque, it's Byzantine, so it's coming from the sort of from the east.
The technique of using coloured stone alternating with white stone originated in Byzantium. It spread to both the Islamic world and to Western Europe, where it inspired masons who were rediscovering ancient techniques.
From the 5th century, then 11th century, all the country, they don't use stone, so they forget.
Right, so just using wood?
Yes, so they have to look at the antique tradition, and so they see Rome, Greek architecture, Armenian architecture. So they think about it, and they do, oh, we can do something with stone like this. Well, why not? We tried to do it.
Byzantine-style black and white arches like these at Vézelay can be seen in medieval buildings throughout Europe. And now the masons are ready to install theirs at Guédelon.
We've got a former built out of wood, unique for this doorway, and we're going to build up, continuing the black, white, the limestone and the pith from the quarry here to create a beautiful archway.
Both sides of the arch are built in parallel to make sure the stones are absolutely level and the keystones will fit. The stone Clement Peter dressed in the lodge is at the base of the arch, so it's vital that it's positioned perfectly.
Now it all makes sense, this stone that we've seen Clement work on. We can see the bit that sticks out there that goes into the curtain wall that leads towards the Great Hall. The curve here that is going to become the curve of the doorway, that Gothic arch.
The stones have been measured precisely to allow room for the lime mortar. But only the parts exposed to the air will set properly.
And certainly there are Roman buildings that have been taken apart, and inside they have found that mortar, that lime mortar, in 2,000 years, it's not gone off. In 2,000 years, it's not set. It is still as wet as this is today.
The last stones to go in are the keystones. The stones are marked with arrows to show their orientation, but it's not always foolproof.
Alors, c'est l'autre côté. Ok, on recommence. The other side.
We're just spinning this keystone around. And there we have it, our final arch.
Last-minute adjustments are made to the stones using wooden wedges, which will hold them in position while they set.
As much as this is as precise as it can be, and it's almost down to millimetre perfection. When you're here, when you're at the coalface, you've just got to tickle it a little bit to get it to work. It's like when you buy your flat-pack furniture, there's always a few bits left over, isn't there? What do they do?
Once the stones are in place, the wooden former can be removed to reveal the arch. While the door Tom made is seasoning, he's come to work on another door that was prepared a year ago. It must now be trimmed to size to fit inside the kitchen doorway.
What I found really interesting, actually, they've orientated the saw blade at a right angle to the saw. So by turning the saw, you can use this two-handed up and down technique to work across and cut cleanly. And that's the secret.
Two strap hinges will form an integral part of the door, spanning the planks and helping to reinforce them. Blacksmith Martin Claudel is making them from strips of iron. First, they need to be hammered flat, a task requiring a real team effort.
Hammer, 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 get it in, bellows, 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 right temperature, out again, hammer, hammer, hammer. You really do need a team of people working with you, don't you?
But it's so funny to work together.
So you've got to be friends, otherwise...
No, it's not working.
Yeah.
But working together isn't always easy.
And we need to strike less stronger, but more precise. Pas de problème.
The end of the strap needs to be trimmed and curved round to form the part of the hinge that will hang on the wall. And this curve must be firmly secured in place.
So now we are ready for the forge weld.
Forge welding involves joining two pieces of metal together using intense heat, where the iron is nearly molten. Martin is using sand as a flux, which keeps the surfaces clean, helping the metal to bond.
We're almost at that crucial temperature now, between 1300 and 1400 degrees. The heat coming off here is much more intense than it has been. This is when Martin's going to hammer those two bits of metal together to seal off that hinge. He's going to have to work really quickly.
At the opposite end of the scale of metalwork was the production of gold thread, a highly skilled craft, dominated mostly by women. Ruth and her daughter Eve, who works with historic textiles, are attempting to make some using gold foil.
So there it is. It's not as thin as the usual gold leaf.
Gold foil would have been made by hammering gold coins between leather until around 0.5 millimeter thick.
So we're going to want little ribbons cut that are sort of, you know, no more than 1 millimetre.
It just seems to be getting the right amount of pressure, doesn't it?
Well, it's kind of straight. Oh.
Do you want to have a go at seeing if you can wrap it?
Ruth and Eve are experimenting with their technique. They're holding the silk core in place between two pins while they attempt to wind the ribbons round the core.
This is sort of madness, isn't it? People talk about lost crafts all the time. This is something that you could say really is lost. This doesn't appear to be working terribly well. Maybe we could turn it by rolling it with our fingers. Oh! Oh, I think I've got it.
I did it! I did it! Look at that!
Look! It looks like gold thread.
Yeah.
It's got that sort of stiff, bouncy flexibility that's completely different from the silk.
Gold thread was typically found in a special type of embroidery, known as opus anglicanum, made almost exclusively in London. Renowned for its complicated stitching, it appeared on the finest fabrics, from the vestments of bishops and popes to elaborate wall hangings in great castles. Ruth is attempting to make a small piece to mount on a cushion. Eve is making silk braid on a box lid to use as a trim.
So this
is something that is supposed to have a 7-year apprenticeship.
And you're doing it with how many years apprenticeship?
About 5 minutes.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So I don't know quite how it's going to go.
Using the silk she dyed, Ruth starts with split stitching, a technique where each stitch is punctured by the next.
Means that you get a very dense line, but it also means that you can be very accurate in where the line twists and turns to.
The second technique, an underside couched stitch, was used to attach the gold thread.
So I'm going to have a go at some of this gold. So if I lay a little piece of our gold thread across there. Now, the sewing is done with this thread, this fine linen thread. So what has to happen is it comes up and round it. Now, the point is that I have to get this thread back through exactly the same hole that it came up in. But that's not where you stop. Then you grab hold of the linen thread from behind and you have to pull. And what I'm trying to do is to pull it so hard that it pops a bit of the gold thread through the fabric. I'm hauling the thread through.
During its heyday in the mid-13th century, Opus Anglicanum was traded for huge sums, only affordable to nobles, kings, and the richest clergy.
I know nowadays people think of this as, you know, sort of a lady's occupation, as a bit of frippery on the side, but there was a real industry in the 13th century run by women. Indeed, the best English embroidery seems to have been done in professional, secular workshops in London.
You can have your own shop. You can be in charge of yourself and of apprentices and staff. And it's the only profession that you can really do that and get the full recognition as being a master of your trade.
At the chapel tower, the next phase of the entrance hall has begun.
With the addition of the doorways, this chapel is really taking shape. I mean, this is the internal doorway, pintles here. Only the Lord is going to come into this space. You then have this kind of lobby area with the external ornate doorway, this black and white, this Byzantine-influenced structure. Up the spiral staircase. And then you've got the arch there. And this external door to the chapel needs to be connected to that, to the internal doorway of the chapel, by barrel vaulting to enclose all this space.
The barrel vault will form a curved ceiling, linking the two chapel entrances, creating a corridor. It will be built on top of a wooden former. Arches mark out the shape of the vault, and the lathes provide a surface on which to place the stones. Layer mason Constantin Lemel is in charge.
If you want to have the demonstration, just cover that and you have the name.
Right, yeah.
Like that, you can see it just looks like a bubble.
Yeah.
You have the name. There wasn't very creative for the names.
The lathes are laid loosely in place and not nailed, so they can be easily removed once the vault is built. To fit tightly in place, the stones need to have regular edges, so the first job is to straighten them off.
So just that little lump there needs to come off. Oh! Now that's the problem. I have actually hit that one too many times. You can just see there's a crack forming there. My lovely square edge is compromised. You can see it's all the way there. I could probably break that off with my hands, which I can.
The stones are tested on the former to ensure that there are no gaps, which might cause weakness.
The thing I realise is this castle gets built twice. Firstly, every stone is put in place to see if it fits there. Then it's taken out, mortar's added, and it goes back in. By the end of it, enough energy will have been expended to have built two castles.
Once their positions are finalised, they're mortared into place. But the weather isn't on their side. The rain will wash away the mortar, So there's a drive to get it finished and covered up.
It's like a row of rotten teeth. It's like a porcupine that's been run over. It's not nice. But when we remove those formers, it should be beautiful stone.
Finally, the last stone is in place.
You can check that it's already good.
Yeah.
If it wasn't, the form couldn't resist.
That is trust.
With the advent of Gothic architecture, increasingly ambitious structures could be built in castles. On the tracing floor, Clément is planning what will be one of the most complicated projects at Guédelon so far.
This all looks so much more intricate than the other things I've seen, so much more delicate. What are you drawing up?
La grande fenêtre pour la chapelle.
Big window for the chapel? Yes. Oh, well, that would have to be grand, wouldn't it? Yes.
The chapel window is a Gothic arch made up of 34 individually carved pieces and incorporating 2 smaller arches, a popular design of the time.
Now, that's a very, very Gothic shape, isn't it? It's one of sort of, whenever you're thinking of Gothic arches, that's pretty much what you have in mind.
It's a good period for the stonemason.
Yes?
13th century, it's perfect. Church, cathedral.
Of course, Gothic architecture had been around for quite a while by 1250, but it had been developed and was concentrated in ecclesiastical buildings, churches, cathedrals, monasteries. For a castle, this is quite fashionable and new to have a Gothically pointed window. You do really have to think in sort of 3 dimensions, don't you? I mean, how it's going to look from every angle, the front, the back, the sides, the...
I dream the part of window.
Do you really?
Yes. I work all the day on the castle.
And dream about it at night. Yeah.
Now, these windows, you have just 2 stones ready. 3 stones, and these stones, it's here.
It is
just
2 here.
Just 2 stones.
Just the 2 out of all of it.
Oh, it's a good way. It's good.
A good start.
The mortar is still setting on the chapel tower vault, so Peter has come to help Tom install the kitchen door.
That cart looks a bit too small for this door.
Blacksmith Vincent Granon and carpenter Stéphane Boudy are both needed for what is a tricky job.
I do love the fact this is a moment at Guédelon where the crafts come together. You've got the blacksmith, and you've got the carpenter, and you've got the jokers.
The door needs to be edged carefully into place and held in position before the hinges can be nailed on.
I think this entire castle has been built in small wooden wedges. One of the main problems we've got is this is 100 kilos worth of door at least. They've got to get it right. And right now, they're not sure whether to shave off some of that render or actually cut some of that wood to fit it in. These strap hinges are starting to fit into these chiseled grooves.
The hinges must be attached precisely, a few centimeters out of place, and the door won't open.
Wow. We have a door.
Looks like an Iron Maiden from this side.
The nails need to be bent over to anchor them in place.
So hold the sledgehammer against it, head of the nail, door in tight against the wall, and then you're bending that over to create a staple.
Yeah, oh, blimey. There's a lot more movement in this than you think.
Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. You're on the wrong nail. I'm holding this one.
This process of hammering the nail over and tucking it in, it's really acted as a staple. You pull these together.
I didn't realise you'd have a little claw digging back into the wood.
This isn't getting shifted for anything.
With valuable produce stored in the kitchen, heavy doors would have helped keep the area secure. Perhaps the most expensive commodities in a castle kitchen were the spices, imported from the east. The returning crusaders of the 13th century had acquired a taste for spice, and it became popular with wealthy lords. Ruth is making gingerbread. Because of its long journey to Europe, ginger was only available in dried forms and must be ground into a powder.
This is the first and the most important spice that I'm going to be using in making some gingerbread. Every single grain of spice that was used had to come the overland route, the old Silk Route. You mustn't think of a Chinese merchant making his way all the way to medieval France. Instead, you must think of that Chinese merchant selling his wares to another merchant who takes them to the next market and sells them to another merchant. By the time it gets here, it may well have passed through 30, 40 different hands with a small profit accrued at every stage of the journey.
Spices were desired as much for their culinary properties as they were as a status symbol. Gingerbread also included nutmeg, red peppercorns, cloves, and cinnamon.
The extreme expense of something like this, and I do mean extreme expense, meant that the only people who could afford it were the nobility and royalty. You were, after all, eating something that was worth more than pure gold by quite a long way.
The ground spices are made into a paste with honey. Next, bread is combined with some red wine.
This is best done with a hand.
The spice and honey paste is added. And the mixture is set on a board.
I'm just going to take the pulp and spread it out thin. Doesn't look very appetizing at this stage, does it? So I'm going to tidy it up, because once it is dry, I want to cut it into perfect little lozenges. It gets dished out rather parsimoniously. A little lozenge, now and again, only for your very best guests.
The barrel vault has been setting overnight, and now the formers need to be removed. If the masons have got it wrong, the whole vault could collapse.
There's no reason why this should fall in, but you never know. It is the ultimate appraisal of their work. And that's the reason why I've got a hard hat on, because this is medieval technology, but we are in the modern world.
The first stage is to lower the scaffolding uprights that are supporting the formers.
This will drop all the scaffolding down, and then we can start taking the formers out. As they hit that wood, as they hit those wedges, I can feel the vibrations in this arch.
Potentially, it's good.
Potentially, it's good.
Now I'm very glad, because I don't tell you, but
here we go.
The vault can push, and
So fresh, it's practically
and no, I think yes, but nothing has been pushed. So good. We are going to see now. Hey, c'est cool.
I'm actually standing in the most dangerous position, it seems.
With the scaffolding lowered, the wooden lathes can come out, followed by the formers.
On va déjà retirer tout le temps. Oh là. Ça va? Ouais, ça va.
As the formers and lath come out, the fresh mortar is dropping down from the barrel vault. But it emphasises the fact that the mortar isn't integral to the structure. It's the stones themselves that create the arch, that creates the strength in the vault. You're now indoors, Florian. You've got a roof over your head. You're happy, are you?
Yes. That's a wonderful word.
Now all that's left to do is a bit of clearing up.
Oh!
Oh, there's still raining water here. Oh.
It's up.
It is up. What do you think?
I can see a hole.
Always a critic.
made a nice, like, Battenberg cake out of stone.
Always thinking of your tummy.
Don't listen to him. I think it's lovely.
It's late summer, and life at the castle is in full flow. Livestock would have been kept in the grounds, from poultry to sheep. And at Guédelon, they're enjoying the sunshine.
These are our castle sheep. They're from the Isle of Weston, off the coast of Brittany. They're essentially the closest thing you're going to find to medieval sheep. They're much smaller than modern breeds. And when they were around the castle in the medieval time, they would have been essentially wild.
Ruth has finished her embroidery cushion.
Well, it's good for me. I can see why I'd need another 6 years, 11 months and 3 weeks apprenticeship, mind, to be any good, really. First attempt.
And Peter is dealing with the effects of working on a medieval building site.
The problem with lime mortar is the lime is so caustic, it's so corrosive, and it just dries out the skin. So I've taken to just applying a bit of pig fat, which, for me, just keeps my hands soft and supple. One of the major problems, it does smell, and there's more dogs than people on this site, and I am currently the dog's best friend.
Castle building was seasonal work, lasting from the spring to the autumn. At the end of a season, unfinished walls would be sealed with a layer of mortar to protect them from rain and frost. But for the decorative chapel window, this won't be possible. So the team are working hard to finish the project before the winter weather arrives.
Well, it's more than 2 stones now. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus those 2 that were here before. Well, we've got 34 in total to do, so the Mason's Lodge, you can hear it, is ringing with people working. And when you look at them, I mean, the intricacy, the complicated nature of this stone carving, it's no wonder it's taking so long. In fact, so much work is there to do. They've opened a second lodge over the far side of the castle, and anyone who can work stone at all is being dragooned into making the window.
Intricate stonework was in high demand, and masons were employed based on their work in other buildings. Window design was particularly important, and something the lord of a castle would have direct influence over. Ruth has come for a lesson in fine masonry with Mathieu Carnevillier.
How long has this stone taken?
4 days.
4 days?
Yeah, and she's no finish.
A stonemason's apprenticeship lasted 7 years. So for Ruth, this is a very valuable stone to start on.
So what's the technique?
It's not difficult.
Hard work, though.
Just
a little
Relance
different
un
angle.
petit peu plus, like this.
I
perfect.
see. And I'm just sort of wearing down the surface. Too hard, too soft?
Yeah,
it's okay. It's a really strange mix, this, between something that's very delicate and, on the other hand, really heavy.
The most detailed stones are dressed by the experienced masons, but simpler stones are supplied by the second lodge.
So this is just getting the stone ready for the skilled work over there. You are not normally a mason, are you?
No.
No. You're usually one of the guides, but absolutely everybody is being pressed into service to do a little bit extra. This looks pretty good to me. Can I have a go?
Okay, you can. Like music.
So always at an angle so that I'm not going into the stone, I'm going across the stone. This is an awful lot more crude than I was doing in the other lodge. It's actually a heck of a lot easier. You might think trying to chip big bits off is harder than chipping teeny weeny bits off, but it's not. These are so much lighter for a start.
The stones for the windowsill are ready to be put in place.
I think of everything that we've done here at Gedlon, I find this the most stressful because the amount of work that's gone into this. You get it wrong, and you crack that stone, that's it, you know. Well, not that's it, but that'll be forever in the record of Gedlon. Your mistake.
The carving on the limestone blocks is incredibly delicate. Flat braided ropes, known as torch, are used to protect the stones during transit. And even the wooden rollers are specially shaped and smoothed, so they don't fall down.
I mean, I've been into probably hundreds of churches, looked at possibly thousands of windows. I have never appreciated just how much work goes into making them.
It's a real mixture of pre-planning, execution. They're just making adjustments as they go, and they're talking all the time, communicating. It's a real team effort. We learn a lot from this.
Before their time at the castle comes to an end, Ruth has gone to experience something which would have been commonplace yet extraordinary in the 13th century. Going on pilgrimage. For many people who lived in the same community their whole lives, this was a chance to see the world and temporarily escape the monotony of daily life.
Pilgrimage is a really big thing at this point in history, isn't it?
Everyone is going on pilgrimage who can.
Hundreds and hundreds of people are surging up these paths.
Absolutely.
Meeting together, exchanging ideas, feeling part of a bigger world.
Ruth is on her way to the town of Vézelay to visit the Basilica of St. Mary Magdalene, one of the most important pilgrimage churches of the 13th century. Chris Kelly, who runs the visitor centre, will be her guide.
It sort of looks like a castle, doesn't it? Or a fortified city, I suppose.
Absolutely, it is a fortified city. You can see the width of this gate, which is more than 4 meters, which is enormous. So in fact, you can understand it's not for defensive purposes, it's for processions. In fact, it's the pilgrim entrance, so wide because there were so many people. And this goes direct up to the basilica.
From the early 11th century, the relics of Mary Magdalene were displayed at Vézelay. News of miracles spread, and the church soon became a centre for pilgrims. One of the 4 starting points on the road to Santiago de Compostela, Vézelay was a religious destination of huge importance. Today, the pilgrimage of Les Pères de Famille is taking place. This ritual of walking across the landscape to compass spiritual reflection is the same now as it would have been in the Middle Ages.
So when the pilgrim arrived here, he would, when he walked in through those doors, naturally his eyes are drawn up to this semicircle of sculpted stone. And the first person he's going to see is Christ there.
So we've got Christ in the centre.
Yes.
And he seems to have ridiculously big hands, as far as I can see.
Yeah. So the hand represents welcome. He's welcoming everybody who comes into this place. On the far right, there are 2 people with very big ears.
Yes.
Some people say they look like wings. In fact, they're seen as a reference to St. Benedict's rule. Open the ears of your heart and listen to the Master inside. That is to say, be who you are to the fullness of who you are.
I think most of us, when we think about medieval people and their experience of religion, we tend to think that people were largely ignorant, but this is a very sophisticated way of thinking.
Of course, the monks, their roles is to explain to each person when they arrive.
You could think of it like a visit to the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, and experts have to tell you what to think almost about it.
Yes.
It's got an element of that tourism and...
Yes, you might call it spiritual tourism.
A once humble church, the basilica was expanded to make room for all the pilgrims. Kings, nobles and abbots came along with thousands of ordinary folk to venerate the relics and confess their sins.
Pilgrimage can be understood as a physical journey that helps you to have a spiritual journey by leaving behind everyday life. You are putting yourself into the right frame of mind to help yourself grow inside.
It's been an endeavor of epic proportions, but the intricate carved stones for the chapel window are now ready to be installed. Over 2,700 hours' work have gone into shaping and refining the delicate pieces, crafted out of 15 tons of stone.
How long do these take to make then?
15 days.
Were you pleased with the results?
Yes, perfect. Time, it's not important.
Yeah, as long as you get it right.
With stonework this delicate, it's important to get it securely installed quickly, so the surrounding walls can be built up to protect it.
This is a massive push to get this finished because the chapel's got to be covered up before that bad weather sets in. Otherwise, all that work can be undone. And this really is medieval crunch time.
One of the most critical pieces is the mullion, the central pillar which will support both of the internal arches in the window. But there's a problem. It's too tall. This must be corrected before the stone can go in, or the rest of the window won't fit together properly.
That mullion for the window is 1 centimetre too long, so Clement is going to have to shave a perfect centimetre off the bottom of that mullion prior to it going in, prior to them finishing the window. I mean, there's already a time pressure, and things like this are just gonna... You can't plan for that at all, can you?
Well, this is Gidlon, isn't it? This is the whole purpose, learning as you do.
Clement's last-minute adjustment will be put to the test, as the rest of the stones can now be painstakingly eased into position.
Are they happy? It's hard to tell.
And the formers are removed. Everyone who worked on the window has come to see it finally revealed.
Well, I have to look everywhere because it's beautiful everywhere. All the Gothic forms are made by the light. So here it's white and here it's dark. It's like a painting.
Now, the key question, are you happy?
I think yes.
He's not sure.
Yes, I am.
With the window finished, the team's time at Guédelon is coming to an end. The seasonal nature of castle building meant many of the workers were itinerant, moving from place to place and seeking other employment in the winter months. All that's left to do is to tidy the site and clear the hovel. But with 13th century accommodation so sparsely furnished, there's not much to pack up. Ruth just needs to clean the floor.
These rushes have been down for a couple of months now. They are beginning to get quite trodden down and quite broken up. Underneath the surface, which still looks reasonably clean, I really was expecting to see insects moving around. I was expecting to see mouse droppings. And it's just not here. So this is obviously the moment to clear it all out.
probably the most important thing I think I've learned on site is how to put technique before anything else. You don't go in with pure strength or force. You learn the techniques that allow you to work for long periods of time and work accurately. If you get your technique right, then everything else will follow.
I really liked seeing the way the geometry has come into play. We all studied this at schools. It seems so distant and pointless, and yet here we can see exactly what it's all for. And now, when I look at all of the built world, I can see the geometry. I can see why those lessons actually were really important.
Gedlong is the largest experimental archaeology project in the world. But the castle itself is merely a byproduct. The experiment is creating the Chantier Médiéval, the medieval building site. Having seen just how much work goes into laying, say, a single stone, whenever I see a ruined castle, I won't be looking at the building itself. I'll be looking at the hundreds of craftspeople that were involved in that project, the thousands of hours of labour that went to make it, and the community that surrounded it. How do you build a castle? Well, I know now.